Alright guys, how you doing? It's Jason from the Body Dojo. I'm back here with another video. Actually today I'm gonna go over how to use the gymnastics rings, how to adjust your leverage and your resistance using the gymnastics rings. And this is especially important for a lot of you guys that are starting out in the white belt levels and doing a lot of the inclined movements. So I'm gonna walk you through on the rings and give you some tips and tricks and advice on how to position your body and how to properly adjust the gymnastics rings to either increase or decrease your resistance, and what to focus on regarding form and body positioning. All right, so as you can see here, I'm at the park right now. I got the ring set up on this pretty high bar, and this gives me a lot of vertical space to play around with the positioning of the rings. Some of you at home might be lucky enough to have a bar this high. Swing sets are commonly about this height, so if you have a swing set at home, you could hang your rings on the top of your swing set, and you'd have a similar setup. Any pull-up bar works too, especially if you're in the white belt levels, yellow belt levels. You'll be fine hanging it from a pull-up bar. Again, make sure your pull-up bar is sturdy and can handle the loads at angles. So the thing about rings is the load is going to be pulling on the bar at different angles, so you want to make sure, especially the pull-up bar, is affixed to the studs or framing of the building that you're in, the house or building. Or if you're at the park, obviously a pull-up bar is going to be pretty sturdy. All right, so with that, one thing you remember when you adjust the rings is create a reference point where you're positioning the rings. Especially when you're starting out, you want to remember how low or high the rings are adjusted, so that way the next time you do the exercise, you could either go higher or lower. There's a lot of little flies around here. All right, so right now, what I like to do is I reference the rings off of my body. I use my skeletal system, my bones, to see where the rings are. So right now I have them positioned, and I always reference off the bottom of the rings, or the this bottom portion here, and I say, okay, where is this in relation to my body? So right now this is about at my pelvic bone right here in the front. So we say, okay, this is where they're positioned. You really only need to reference one ring, because when you reference off one ring, the other ring you just want to make equal to that, right? So now I got the rings at my pelvic bone region. So now I know when I do whatever exercise and I'm only able to do 8 or 10 reps, I know that if I go lower on the rings, like if I'm doing push-ups, then I'm going to be able to do, that's going to increase the difficulty of the exercise, and I'm then going to reference off a different part. So now it's important to write that down. So on the Body Dojo, we give you a workout log. So as you're tracking your workouts, there's a little notes section. Write down where you're referencing the ring off your body. So today, you say, today the rings are about at pelvic bone height, and when you rep your log, when you track your logs, you say, okay, on that incline push-up, I was able to do 14 reps comfortably, or 14 reps until my form broke. So now you know the next time you do that exercise, you either, if you want to do 14 or 15 reps again, you know how high to make the rings, or if you want to make the exercise even more difficult, you would lower the rings, increase the difficulty, and then again record that. Okay, so that's those are some tips around referencing the rings. Again, depending on what kind of exercise you're doing, the rings might be chest height, collarbone height, pelvic bone height, belly button height. So use different parts of your body: knee height, ankle height, or halfway between your knee and your hip. So those general reference points are good enough for you to remember where you're putting the rings. So depending on what kind of rings you have, here I have two different examples. I have one set of rings with the straps, and they're blank, right? There's no markings on them. And this set of rings, I don't know if you can see it from where the camera is, but it actually has markings on the straps with numbers and lines. So this is supposed to help you consistently adjust, where you're positioning the straps. So these are great. If you're always hanging the rings from the same apparatus, from the same set of bars, or for the same tree or whatever. But when you're always moving around and working on different, hanging the rings from different heights, these may be less reliable because, one day you're hanging from a 12-foot bar and this is going to read 11, and then the next day you're hanging from a lower pull-up bar and this is going to read, 8. So it's good for getting the two rings, level. If it's too difficult for you to do it with your eyeballs, so some people like that. But using these markings as a reference point for how high or low you're doing the rings would be useful only if you're always hanging from the same height fixture. Okay, so now that we went over ring positioning and recording reference points as you're doing your exercises, I'm going to show you some common techniques on where to position your body when you're doing pushing exercises or pulling exercises using the gymnastics rings. So I'm going to walk you guys through some common body positioning when you're doing push-ups or pushing movements and pulling movements with some of the basic progressions on the rings. So if we're going to do, let's start with incline push-ups on the rings. So I have the rings positioned at about my pelvic bone, and if I'm going to do a push-up, an incline push-up, I want my torso is going to be at a positive angle with the ground. So what I see a lot of people do is they step backwards and then they bring the rings forward and then they try to find a balance here. So this is going to be a lot more difficult, and you'll find your arms start to extend upward, and you won't be able to do a push-up that way. By pushing, so starting where the rings are hanging, push the rings forward, and then adjust your feet around that. So here I'm going to bring my step back a little with my foot and see where that's at. Now I found a level where I have balance. So it's going to take some practice, but just remember that when you do the push-up, the straps are not going to be perfectly vertical. They're going to be at an angle, especially when you're doing incline movements. So always start by pushing your hands forward and then adjust your feet around your hands here. So now I can perform my push-up. One thing to keep note of too is, especially when you're starting out, like in white belt, is don't rush the movements. I actually want you to do the push-ups almost like a 4 count or a 6 count. So what I mean by that is when you do the push-up, count down like 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then push up 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And then also make sure you're using that full range of motion. So extended scapula at the top, and then when you come down, retract the scapula, bring your shoulder blades together, and then push away. 1, 2, 3. And the reason that is, when you slow down the movement, you'll start using the muscles, all your supporting scapular muscles throughout that range of motion. If you do the movement fast, what happens is you skip the range of motion tension at some point in the middle. So around here, boom, I'm using momentum to push myself up, and what happens is I'm not using my supporting muscles as much as I'd like to. So if you have any imbalances in your scapula, if you look at your posture and you find yourself with protracted shoulders like this, it's important to do these exercises slowly at first to increase the strength in your rhomboids and in your trapezius and scapular muscles to pull your shoulder blades together. So the only way to do that without me actually looking at you and drawing up some specific exercises is practice these exercises at first slowly. So that way you're hitting all the supporting muscles throughout its range of movement without passing through its strength, passing through its tension using momentum. That's another key point, especially when you're first starting out. All right, so the next thing is when you're doing pulling movements. What I want you to do is bring the rings back. I'm going to walk back, so the rings come behind my frontal plane there, and then this one's a little easier to position. Just keep falling back until you can hang with your arms straight. So you find that angle. It's a little easier to adjust your angle this way because you can just move your feet forwards or backwards. And then you perform your pulling movement. Again, when you're first starting out, I want you to do it slowly. So full range of motion, but do a 3 count, up, 2, 3, and then 3 count down, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3 count up, and 3 count down. This way I'm ensuring I'm using my supporting and stabilizing muscles through their range of motion and not bypassing it with momentum. So again, the pulling exercises are a little easier to get a hold of because you're hanging. The key to remember here with these is you want to make sure you're not like on a slippery surface. So here I'm on this dirt surface, and I might, if I start lowering my angle, I might find myself slipping. So you might want to anchor yourself on something. Either make sure your shoes are grippy enough, or you maybe put something in front of you or a friend to put their foot down to keep you from sliding. So just be conscious of that and do your pulling movements as instructed. So when you're first starting out again, do the movement slowly. Focus on your repetitions between like 12 and 15 repetitions, and that'll be good enough to get you going. So hope that helps with your pushing and pulling movements, especially in the white belt levels, using those inclined either pulling exercises or the inclined pushing exercises. So again, with the pushing exercises, bring the rings forward of that frontal plane. So the frontal plane is going this way. Bring the rings forward of it for pushing movements. For pulling movements, bring the rings behind it. So always be conscious of the space around you. If your ring setup is by a wall or something, start playing around with the height of the rings to make sure that you have sufficient space to perform your exercises. Again, when you do your pull-ups or your pulling rows or push-ups, always reference and mark down in your log where your rings are relative to your body, so the next time you do that exercise, you know for how many reps, for the specific height, how many reps you were able to do, and then adjust accordingly whether you want to go harder or easier. So that's why it's important to keep a journal, and we make it easy for you to do on the Body Dojo with our workout tracker. So that's all for you guys today. Thanks for watching.